Hello everyone, welcome back to the Strange Night podcast channel. Episode 1, The Curse of the Bell Witch. Welcome to American Shadows. Tonight we turn back the clock to the early 19th century, to a tranquil farming community in Adams, Tennessee. This was once the home of the Bell family, a respectable and prosperous farming family, led by John Bell. It all started small, like a faint sound carried on the wind. In 1817, John Bell began noticing strange phenomena on his farm. First, it was seeing a creature, half dog, half rabbit, with fierce red eyes. Next came sounds, growing louder and more insistent, knocking on doors, scratching on walls, and the moaning of animals right inside the house. At first, John Bell kept it to himself. He was a rational man, and believed it was merely the mischief of rats or wild animals. But the sounds quickly became more aggressive. They were no longer just knocks, but powerful pounding on the walls, as if an angry man was trying to break in. Then one night, the most terrifying sound echoed from the bedroom of his youngest daughter, Betsy Bell. It was the sound of choking. John Bell was forced to tell his wife and children. They stayed awake together and watched in horror as the invisible entity escalated its attacks. Initially, it began slapping and pulling the hair of the children as they slept. Sometimes, a blanket would be violently yanked off the bed, or a shoe would be flung across the room for no apparent reason. However, the spirit's main target was always Betsy Bell. The family began to hear whispers. They were faint and unintelligible, like the wind whistling through a crack. But gradually, they became clearer. The spirit began to speak. The voice was sometimes a demonic growl, sometimes sweet like a child, and sometimes a sharp, spiteful old woman. It introduced itself as Kate, and declared that it had come to harass and kill John Bell. And that was when they realized this was no ordinary haunting, but a curse. John Bell sought help from friends and local ministers. The rumors spread so quickly that even Andrew Jackson, the general who would later become President of the United States, came to the Bell farm to investigate. Legend has it that Jackson and his entourage were attacked by invisible forces and forced to flee in terror. The entity's power defied all understanding. It could converse fluently, recite scripture, sing hymns, and even reveal the deepest secrets of those who came to visit. It called itself the Bell Witch, and was widely believed to be the spirit of Kate Batts, a neighbor with whom John Bell had a land dispute. The physical attacks became increasingly brutal. Betsy Bell was scratched, slapped in the face, and jabbed with pins mercilessly, often leaving her face swollen and red. But the most intensely hunted was John Bell himself. He began to grow sick. His body withered, his mouth became paralyzed, and he struggled to eat or drink. The Kate entity constantly mocked and threatened him, vowing that it would not let him live. One fateful morning, John Bell fell gravely ill. His family found him in a comatose state. Next to his bed was a strange bottle of medicine they had never seen before. One of his sons, John Bell Jr., brought the bottle to the Kate entity. The voice of Kate rang out across the room, cold and triumphant. "This is what I gave old John Bell. I have done this." They desperately took the bottle away for analysis, but John Bell did not recover. He passed away on December 20th, 1820. During his funeral, the joyful singing and terrifying laughter of the Bell Witch echoed through the air, mocking his passing. As John Bell was buried, the chilling and wicked laughter of Kate Batts followed him to his final resting place. After John Bell's death, Kate promised to return in 7 years, and according to legend, it kept its word. It then vanished again, but the threat that it would return at some unknown time still lingers. To this day, The story of the Bell Witch is the only case of a haunting in history to be officially documented, in a written account, penned by one of John Bell's sons. This vengeful spirit achieved its goal, killing a man. But did it truly disappear? Or is it merely waiting for the next generation to continue its curse? Episode 2: The Crybaby Creature. Welcome back to American Shadows. If the story of the Bell Witch was the terror of an uninvited presence in your home, tonight we step outside to the desolate and forgotten places. The Crybaby Bridge is an urban legend found in almost every U.S. state, but the most popular variations often originate from rural Ohio. The legend tells of old, dark bridges crossing rivers or ravines, where, on some night in the past, a desperate mother ended her child's life. They say that if you stop your car on the bridge at midnight, turn off the engine, and listen in absolute silence, you will hear it, the crying of the baby. But is it merely the cry of a tiny, abandoned soul? Or is something far more sinister lurking, waiting for your attention? Tonight's story focuses on 3 college students in Ohio, Mike, Jess, and Sam, who decide to perform the ritual. They drive out to a notorious Crybaby Bridge near their town, a spot known for strange car accidents. They park their car dead center on the bridge, where old barbed wire and moss cover the cold concrete slabs. Mike turns off the engine. The 3 sit silently in the dense darkness, with only the faint chirping of insects and the soft sound of water flowing underneath. 5 minutes pass. They start to laugh and mock each other. "Nothing's happening," Jess says. "Just a stupid ghost story." Just then, Sam, sitting in the back seat, stiffens. "Wait," he whispers. In the stillness, they begin to hear a faint, persistent sound. Not a loud cry, but a distant whimper, as if muffled beneath a layer of water. They turn on their phone's voice recorder. The whimpering gets closer. This time it sounds like hiccuping, broken sobs, interspersed with gasping breaths. All 3 start to feel a deep chill, despite the windows being closed. As the crying reached the middle of the bridge, it abruptly changed. The small, pathetic cry transformed into a deafening shriek, not of an infant, but of a furious, manic adult. The sound no longer seemed to come from under the bridge, but was instead right on top of their car. Sam panicked, pointing at the rear window. "Something's there. I saw a shadow." They didn't see a child, but a tall, pitch-black shadow, fleetingly reflected on the windshield, as if a figure was hunched over, staring down at them. The shrieking was now a furious roar, filled with desperation, mixed with a strange sound of tearing metal. Jess screamed, "That's not the baby. That's the mother." Mike twisted the key. The engine died. He tried to start it a second time, then a third. Nothing. The 3 were completely trapped. The manic screeching lasted for about 10 seconds, then abruptly fell silent. The silence returned, heavier and far more terrifying than before. Mike finally managed to start the engine. He floored the gas pedal and sped off the bridge, not daring to look in the rearview mirror. When they got home, they were still shaking, trying to reassure themselves that it was just a prank by local teenagers or some strange wind echo. But upon inspecting the car, they discovered the horrifying truth. On the roof of the car, across the hood, were deep gouges ripped through the paint. But they weren't fingernail scratches. They were deep, long, sharp gashes, as if made by something with large, curved talons. Mike also checked the voice recording on his phone. Most of the recording was just static, but at the very end, right after the shriek, there was another sound, a whisper, very close to the microphone. The voice was neither a cry nor a scream. It was a raspy, slow, and unintelligible voice. as if it was trying to mimic human speech, repeating one phrase, "You heard. Now you're here." It was not the ghost of a murdered child. It was the creature that came to answer that cry, an entity that was drawn in by their curiosity, one that lives beneath the forgotten bridges, waiting to be summoned. It may not be a ghost, it is a predator, and by stopping on that bridge, the three friends became part of the curse. Episode 3, The Appalachian Trail Disappearances. Welcome back to American Shadows. We have moved away from haunted houses and bridges to a vast, majestic, yet terrifying space. The Appalachian Trail, AT. This path, stretching over 2,200 miles, about 3,500 kilometers, from Georgia to Maine, attracts thousands of hikers every year, and it is also the site of some of America's most bizarre and inexplicable disappearances. Unlike our previous ghost stories, the disappearances on the AT do not involve an ancient curse or a vengeful spirit. They involve seasoned hikers who vanish without a trace, sometimes just a few miles from trail shelters. The terrifying part is, those who are later found often cannot recall what happened, or they describe things that are completely irrational. Tonight's story is based on the account of David, a thru hiker who went missing for 2 days on a remote section of the AT in Virginia and was found in a near catatonic state. David recalls that on the 3rd day of his hike, he began to have a strange feeling. He was being watched. The forest was no longer silent. He heard footsteps parallel to his own, but they always stopped when he stopped. He checked his surroundings, only finding trees and mist. The terrifying thing was that he knew all other hikers were miles away from him. In the afternoon, while preparing to set up camp, David started seeing shapes. They were not human shapes. They were tall, gaunt, and black. They moved incredibly fast, just fleeting blinks at the edge of his vision between the trees, like an illusion, yet so real it caught in his throat. He called them the Tall Ones. David panicked and tried to hike faster to the next campsite, but then he realized he was lost. His compass and GPS were working, but the map seemed not to match the terrain. Familiar trails suddenly disappeared or led him back to the exact same spot. That's when he noticed the strange markers. On the trunks of old oak trees, there were deep spiral-shaped cuts or inverted triangle shapes. These cuts were not made by a human with a knife. They were large, located at an unreachable height, and the bark around them was blackened as if scorched. When David touched one of the cuts, he felt a slight electrical sensation. A cold terror washed over him. He ran desperately, but the more he ran, the deeper he seemed to be going into the area marked by these signs. Finally, David remembers finding a small cave, and he decided to hide there for the night. David remembers nothing of his 2 missing days. He was found on the morning of the 3rd day, less than a mile off the AT, curled up at the base of a tree, his clothes torn and his eyes wide and vacant. When he was taken home and treated psychologically, he only recalled the very last moment before losing consciousness. While hiding in the cave, he heard a sound, not footsteps. It was a scraping sound, as if something dry and hard was being dragged across the rocky ground. Then he saw a colossal shadow block the entrance to the cave. It had no discernible face, just a pitch-black shape, so tall it had to stoop low. The thing that haunted David the most was the smell. A horrific stench, like rotting meat and burning sulfur. The shadow slowly placed something down in front of the cave entrance. David couldn't clearly see what it was, but he remembered the feeling. It was a hiking boot, and when he realized it, inside the boot was a section of a human foot. It was the boot that David had seen another hiker who had gone ahead of him by a few hours wearing. After that moment, David remembers nothing. He only woke up under the tree. Authorities concluded he was lost, dehydrated, and hallucinating. But David knew. The tall ones, or whatever they are not human. They are predators, and those strange markers on the trees are their territory. The Appalachian Trail has a power that draws those seeking freedom and isolation. But sometimes that isolation is what kills them. You are not alone on the trail. There are always eyes watching you from the dark. Episode 4, The Winchester Mystery House. Welcome back to American Shadows. Tonight we travel to San Jose, California, to explore one of the world's most bizarre and famously haunted architectural wonders, the Winchester Mystery House. This house is not where a crime was committed. It is where a desperate woman spent her entire life and fortune fleeing the consequences of thousands of crimes. That woman was Sarah Winchester, wife of William Wirt Winchester, heir to the massive fortune from the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. After the deaths of her husband and daughter, Sarah consulted a medium. The verdict was chilling. The Winchester family was haunted by the spirits of everyone killed by the Winchester rifle. To appease and confuse these spirits, Sarah had to move west and build a house that was never to be completed. If the construction stopped, she would die. And so, for 38 continuous years, the Winchester house was under construction, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The house is an architectural chaos designed to deceive the spirits. Imagine, over 160 rooms, 47 fireplaces, 10,000 window panes, and countless nonsensical features. Sarah Winchester tried to create a supernatural labyrinth, stairways to the ceiling, steps that dead-end abruptly, leading nowhere, doors that open to walls, heavy doors that swing open only to face a blank section of wall, windows on the floor, windows installed on the floor of the next room. The purpose of these features was not comfort, but spiritual disorientation. Sarah believed the spirits would get lost in this maze, unable to find her. The central and most eerie room was the seance room. Every night, Sarah would enter this room alone to communicate with the spirits and receive instructions for the next day's construction. She never slept in the same room 2 nights in a row. The most frightening stories about this house involve its continuation. We focus on the year 1975, when the house was already a tourist attraction. Tom was a maintenance worker assigned to check the electrical systems in an old north wing. One night, Tom stayed late to fix a technical glitch. As he worked on the second floor, he heard the clear sound of hammers pounding and saws ripping from the floor below. He assumed it was builders conducting secret repairs, but that was impossible. The house was closed at night. When he went downstairs, the sounds stopped. The room was empty, with no sign of anyone. Tom returned to work. This time he heard a small, rapid, repetitive clicking sound. It sounded like an old typewriter in operation. He followed the sound to a dead-end hallway. The door at the end was locked. Tom inserted his key. When he opened the door, there was no typewriter, just a small, completely empty room, and on the floor, a brand new floorboard, looking as if it had just been nailed down. What chilled him to the bone was that the clicking didn't stop. It was coming from inside the wall. Tom panicked and fled the hallway, trying to find an emergency exit. In his haste, he entered a door he thought led to the staircase. Instead, the door opened to a 4-story drop into empty space. Luckily, he managed to grab the door frame. It was one of the intentionally built death doors Sarah had constructed. Tom eventually made it out. He quit his job immediately, but he left his flashlight behind in the second-floor hallway. When the house manager returned the next morning, they found Tom's flashlight. It wasn't on the floor. It had been carefully placed on a shelf that had been freshly nailed into the empty wall Tom had seen the previous night. And on the door to the seance room, a message had been scratched into the old paint with something sharp. we continue. Even though Sarah Winchester died in 1922 and human construction stopped, the spirits trapped in the house must still obey her command. They continue to build and change the house, attempting to free themselves from the rifle's curse. To this day, visitors and maintenance staff still report hearing the sound of hammers and saws at night. This house will never truly be finished, for Sarah Winchester's fear and obsession remain. The Winchester Mystery House is proof that fear can be transformed into architecture. But was it a refuge for Sarah or her eternal prison? Episode 5. The Jersey Devil. Welcome back to American Shadows. Tonight we journey to New Jersey, a densely populated state that nevertheless harbors a vast, dark, and isolated wilderness known as the Pine Barrens. This immense pine forest is home to a legendary creature that has sown terror for over 250 years. The Jersey Devil. The Jersey Devil is not a ghost, but a creature of flesh and blood, a monster born from a curse. The story begins in 1735 with a woman named Mother Leeds. Legend says that Mother Leeds was pregnant with her 13th child, and in a fit of frustration over her difficult life, she cried out, "Let this one be the devil." When the baby was born, it was not human. It transformed into a horrifying creature right before Mother Leeds' eyes. A horse or goat head, bat wings, sharp claws, and a forked tail. It killed the midwife, flew up the chimney, and vanished into the pine woods. For hundreds of years, the Jersey Devil remained a ghost story used to scare children. That is, until a cold week in January 1909. In that single week, hundreds of people across South Jersey and even Philadelphia claimed to have seen the creature. It was an inexplicable event of mass terror. Tonight's story focuses on the testimony of a mail carrier named Cale, who worked a route in the Gloucester County area. Cale was a skeptical man, until one morning he discovered that all the livestock in Farmer Jenkins' barn on his route had been slaughtered. The animals, cows, chickens, pigs, were torn apart with horrifying strength. Notably, they were not eaten. They were merely killed in a savage manner, seemingly for the pure satisfaction of chaos. When Cale and Mr. Jenkins examined the scene, they found the most terrifying evidence. Around the barnyard, there were tracks deeply imprinted in the cold, snowy ground. The tracks were large and resembled cloven hoofprints, but they only had 2 toes. They hopped in no discernible pattern, sometimes vanishing over clear ground and reappearing on the roof of the shed. Cale followed one set of tracks into the woods. The deeper he went, the colder the air became, and the foul odor of sulfur and dead flesh grew stronger. Suddenly, he heard a piercing shriek that tore through the silence. The sound was described as a mixture of a serpent's hiss, a horse's whinny, and a manic human laugh. When Cale looked up at a tall pine tree, he saw it. The Jersey Devil was perched on the branch. It stood about 10 feet tall, its body gaunt, covered in black fur, and its large wings folded down. The most horrifying features were its glowing red eyes and its goat-like head with curved horns. It wasn't looking at him. It was looking up at the sky. In a moment of sheer terror, the creature spread its wings and swooped straight down towards Cale. But then, it abruptly changed course, soaring high above the treetops. It didn't want to attack Cale. It merely wanted to create panic. Cale collapsed to the ground, utterly paralyzed by fear. As he crawled out of the woods, he witnessed one last sight. On the white snow, there was a shadow circling in the distance. As the shadow passed over a nearby snowy field, it left a trail dragging across the snow. Not a footprint, but a black streak, as if it had scorched the snow with its very being. The Jersey Devil is not just a monster. It is an entity of chaos, bound to the Pine Barrens. And whenever it appears, disaster follows. From Mother Leeds' curse, The Jersey Devil has become a primal fear of what can be born in the dark. It reminds us that even in the most civilized places, ancient monsters lurk, waiting to sow madness. Episode 6: The Ghosts of Old Route 66. Welcome back to American Shadows. We are on Route 66, the Mother Road. This highway was once the lifeblood of America, a symbol of hope and movement. But since the interstate highway system was built, much of Route 66 has been abandoned and forgotten. And when a place is forgotten, it becomes the ideal dwelling for trapped spirits. Route 66 is a 2,400-mile-long haunted museum with ghosts bound by accidents, crimes, and endless solitude. Tonight we will tell two terrifying cases: the headless hitchhiker in Oklahoma and the motel room number 13. The first story takes place on a desolate, remote stretch of Route 66 in Oklahoma, where the road is almost swallowed by trees and weeds. In 1958, a long-haul truck driver named Ed encountered a hitchhiker late one night. The hitchhiker was a man in a stained white shirt, standing directly under the dim headlights of the truck. The strange thing was, he didn't wave. He just stood there, motionless. Ed pulled over and opened the door. The man climbed into the passenger seat. Ed was horrified to realize the man had no head. It wasn't that his head was obscured. It seemed to have been cleanly severed, and his neck was wrapped in a dark bandana. In sheer terror, Ed managed to stammer, "Where do you want to go?" The ghost didn't answer with words. It just pointed a bony finger through the window, straight ahead, toward the road. Ed slammed the gas pedal and sped off in petrified silence. As he raced around a bend, the shadow beside him suddenly gave a strange giggle, a dry, hollow sound, like the tearing of dried leather. When Ed looked to his side again, the seat was empty. All that remained was a dark, damp stain on the seat and the smell of musty old dirt. He drove non-stop until morning, knowing that spirit was bound to that road, waiting for the next driver. The second story takes us to an abandoned roadside motel in Texas, a place that was once a vital stop on Route 66. In 1985, a group of amateur ghost hunters ventured into the old Lone Star Inn. They focused on only one place, room number 13. According to local legend, room 13 was where a couple was brutally murdered by a robber in the 1940s. Their ghosts never left. The ghost hunters set up their cameras and recorders. Initially, there was nothing but the sound of wind whistling through broken windows. But then, they heard it. Not crying or shrieking. It was the sound of a fierce argument. The voices of a man and a woman, echoing from a corner of the room. They turned on their audio recorder. The voices were clear, but they couldn't make out any words. It seemed to be an endless argument, trapped in a loop of time. One member of the team, Maria, stepped closer to the corner. She raised her camera for a picture. The moment the flash went off, the sounds abruptly ceased. Instead, Maria heard a whimper right next to her ear. The whimper clearly said, "She knew." The group panicked and fled, taking the camera and recorder with them. When they reviewed Maria's photo taken in room 13, they saw no ghosts. They saw an old wall, peeling wallpaper, and a small circular mirror resting on a dusty nightstand. In that mirror, it didn't reflect the empty room, but Maria's own terrified face. Except the face was older, distorted, and streaks of tears ran down her cheeks. It was the image of a future Maria, trapped in ultimate fear. And when they listened back to the audio recording, the final phrase, "she knew," was not the spirit. It was Maria's own voice on the recording, distorted, as if she had been replaced or possessed right there in that corner. Route 66 does not just hold the ghosts of those who died. It is a place where passing souls can also be snatched, trapped by the road's endless loneliness and tragedy. The old relics of Route 66 remain, inviting our curiosity. But behind the rusty signs and abandoned motels are souls forever bound to the asphalt, waiting for the next person to share their solitude. Episode 7. Whispers from the Black Forest. Welcome back to American Shadows. We visited woods marked by disappearances, Episode 3, but tonight, we ventured deep into an area with its own notorious reputation, the Black Forest of Pennsylvania. This place is not just dark because of the dense trees. It's dark because something ancient and malevolent is hiding there. Unlike ghosts or monsters, the entities in the Black Forest are famous for their silence and their ability to mimic. They prey on isolation, and their strongest weapon is the degradation of the victim's mind. This story is recounted by a local park ranger and hunter named Elias, who spent his life avoiding these areas until he was forced to enter to search for a missing camper. Elias led a small search party. The moment they crossed the boundary into what was known as the Whispering Zone, he noticed something was wrong. The forest became too quiet. No birdsong, no insects, not even the sound of the wind rustling the leaves. The silence was heavy, almost oppressive. After a few hours of searching, they began to hear unnatural sounds. They were dry, close clicking and snapping sounds. Unlike the breaking of branches, it was the sound of something unnatural bending and moving. Elias saw marks in the mud, not footprints, but long, shallow, dragging marks. Then the whispers began. They were not clear words. They were a rapid, arrhythmic sequence of sounds, like someone trying to learn a language. They came from every direction at once, making it impossible for Elias to pinpoint the source. The terror reached its climax when the search party found a sign of the missing camper, a jacket snagged on a high branch. As they approached, Elias saw them. The shadows. They were not cast shadows. They were tall, thin, inky black entities standing motionless between the trees. They lacked any facial features, and their arms seemed unnaturally long, nearly touching the ground. Elias raised his rifle, but he couldn't pull the trigger. His team members also stood still, as if frozen. Then, one of the shadows mimicked the gesture of a team member named Josh. It slowly lifted its long arm and waved, but the movement was too slow, too unnatural, almost a terrifying mockery. When the shadow waved, it made a sound. It called Josh's name, but it wasn't a normal voice. It was Josh's wife's voice, thin and filled with anxiety. The team finally broke their paralysis and fled the area. They left everything behind, except the missing camper. However, a few days later, Elias was forced to return alone to retrieve the abandoned gear. This time, he found the missing camper. The person was dead. He was found in a clearing, sitting upright inside his sleeping bag. The strange thing was, the camper had no external injuries. The sleeping bag was completely zipped up. He seemed to have simply fallen asleep, but when Elias tried to move the body, he discovered that the sleeping bag was empty. The camper had been removed from the fully zipped sleeping bag, and what was placed inside was not a body, but bones. Dry, white bones, neatly arranged in the bag, and on one rib bone, there was carved a symbol Elias had seen on the trees in Episode 3, the inverted triangle. The mimics had taken the victim, removing everything inside the fully zipped sleeping bag without opening the lock. They didn't leave a murder. They left a message of emptiness. The Black Forest doesn't want to kill you. It wants to replace you. The entities there are identity thieves, stalking mimics. They want you to get lost. They want you to hear a familiar voice, and then they will take what's left of you. Episode 8. The Seance of the Voodoo King. Welcome back to American Shadows. We are in New Orleans, Louisiana, a city steeped in history, music, and the occult. This is the epicenter of voodoo and dark magic, where the line between the living and the dead is razor thin, especially in the old cemeteries which sit above ground. Tonight, we explore the tale of the Voodoo Count, a man believed to have wielded immense voodoo power, who was assassinated and buried in a perpetually sealed tomb in an ancient cemetery on the outskirts of New Orleans. Legend holds that before his death, the Count placed an eternal curse on his grave. Anyone who dared to take anything belonging to him, even a small pebble, would suffer the most terrible revenge. The story focuses on Elias, a young folklorist from New York who came to Louisiana to demystify and debunk the voodoo legends. Elias was a firm skeptic. In 1998, Elias found the Count's tomb. It was a white marble slab covered in moss, surrounded by a rusty iron fence. People often left small offerings there, but no one dared to approach it. Elias dismissed the curse as trickery. To prove his point, he decided to perform an act of defiance. He took an old, rusty chain lock that someone had hung on the fence. It was almost worthless, yet it was an object belonging to the grave. Immediately after taking the item, Elias felt a chill run down his spine, but he quickly dismissed it. Upon returning to his hotel, he began having horrific dreams. Not dreams of ghosts, but dreams of blinding sunlight and the endless screaming of thousands of people. The psychological terror quickly escalated into physical events. On the third night after taking the chain lock, Elias was working on his laptop when he heard a knock at the hotel room door. He opened it. No one was there, but on the hallway carpet, a clump of dark, damp soil was placed right in front of the door. He recognized it as the black clay used in voodoo rituals. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He heard a continuous rustling sound coming from the corner of the room. He turned on the light and saw a tall, pitch-black shape standing there. No features were discernible, just a deep, heavy shadow that seemed to absorb all the light in the room. The shadow didn't speak, nor did it move. It just stared intently at the chain lock lying on the desk. Then, the shadow abruptly dissipated. But as it vanished, the chain lock had become scorching hot, burning the tablecloth beneath it. Elias was now truly terrified. He realized this was not a ghost. This was the power of a dead man, his control over the dark art still intact. Elias decided he had to return the item. He drove back to the cemetery immediately. But when he arrived, everything had changed. The iron fence surrounding the tomb was shattered, and on the white marble slab there was a large crack running vertically from top to bottom, as if something had broken the seal from the inside. As Elias placed the chain lock back onto the cracked slab, the shadow reappeared. This time, it stood right behind the tomb. It let out a sound. Not a voice, but a low, dry laugh, filled with satisfaction. The laughter lingered and echoed, as if it came not just from the dead man, but from the surrounding bayou itself. Then, the shadow disappeared, and never appeared to Elias again. However, when Elias returned to New York, he suffered from chronic insomnia. The scary part was, every morning when he looked in the mirror, he saw a small, faint scar on his left cheek. It was a brand new scar. Elias never knew what the Count did to him in his sleep, or what he took from him in exchange for forgiveness. Dark magic is not bound by death. The Count slept, but his curse did not. Vengeance in the voodoo world is not just about fright. It is about exchange. And perhaps the Count took a piece of Elias's soul to forever keep it bound to the bayou. Episode 9, The Hookman and the Parking Lot Disappearance. Welcome back to American Shadows. We've explored ancient ghosts and mythological creatures, but tonight, we return to the genre of horror that haunted the childhood of many generations. The urban legend. The tale of the Hookman is classic, A psychotic killer escapes from an institution, replacing one of his hands with a sharp iron hook. He preys on young couples parking in secluded spots. The legend usually ends with the couple speeding away and finding the iron hook dangling from the car door handle. But tonight, we tell a version that occurred in a dark, isolated parking lot in suburban California in the late 1970s. A place where the hook wasn't the proof, but the beginning. The story focuses on Mark and Lisa. They had driven to a secluded, overlooked parking lot overlooking the city, often called Lover's Leap, to spend some private time together. They parked. The radio was playing softly. The atmosphere in the car became tense, not because of romance, but because Mark kept bringing up the hook man story he'd heard on the radio that evening. Lisa was annoyed. "Mark, stop it. You're just trying to scare me." Mark gave a strained laugh. "I'm serious. There were reports of an escapee nearby, and I heard this is the spot he likes to lurk." Just then, their car's headlights were violently scraped by something. Mark and Lisa froze. From outside, they heard a loud, chilling sound of metal rending, as if sharp talons were tearing at the car body. They stared at the passenger side window, where the sound had originated. The window was too dark to see anything. In extreme fear, Lisa screamed, "Drive! Go! Fast!" Mark fumbled with the key. He was stressed, and his shaking hand couldn't fit the key into the ignition. The scraping sound returned, this time at the back of the car. "No, I can't drive," Mark stammered. Lisa, in a burst of panic, leaped across Mark, snatched the key, and somehow managed to start the car. She floored the accelerator and sped maniacally out of the parking lot. After driving for about a mile and feeling safe, she stopped under the first streetlight. She turned to Mark, tears streaming down her face. "We're safe, Mark." But the passenger seat was empty. Mark was gone. No door was open. No blood. No sign of a struggle. The car was locked. Lisa screamed. She called the police and was subsequently interrogated for hours. Her story didn't add up. The police found the car back at the parking lot the next day. There was no trace of Mark. However, they did find something on the car. On the passenger side, where Mark had been sitting, there was a large tear in the upholstery. The tear was not a knife cut. It was a huge crescent-shaped rip, as if something had pierced through the door and dragged Mark out. But the most chilling part came from Lisa's final testimony. When the police questioned her, she insisted that Mark had never said the name the Hook Man. He only talked about the escapee killer. The police found a cassette tape in Lisa's car. It was a recording of old radio news broadcasts. When they played the tape, they heard a terrifying voice of a newscaster warning the public about a killer nicknamed the Claw, a hook-handed murderer. But that wasn't Mark's voice. It was the voice of another man, perhaps the one who committed the original murder Mark had heard about. And as the news report ended, another voice cut into the tape, cold and haunting, whispering, "I am the Hook." Mark wasn't killed by a real killer. He was taken by the very legend he invoked, a spirit bound to that place and hungry for more victims. The Hook Man doesn't need a hand anymore. He just needs your fear. This story teaches us a chilling lesson. Urban legends are not just stories to tell. They are invitations. And when you repeat a ghost story, you're not just relaying a tale. You're inviting that spirit into your life. Episode 10, The Devil's Mirror. Welcome back to American Shadows. We have journeyed through cursed farms, haunted woods, and forgotten highways. Tonight, we conclude this terrifying path with the simplest, most universal, and perhaps most dangerous legend of all. Bloody Mary, the Devil's Mirror. This legend doesn't require you to travel to a specific location. It only requires you. You, a dark room, and a mirror. The ritual has been performed by countless teenagers for generations. Turn off the lights, stand before a mirror, and chant the name Bloody Mary 3 times. It is said that the face of a witch, a murdered woman, or a girl who died young will appear to foretell your future. But in the history of horror, whenever you invite an entity into your world, you never truly know who will answer. Tonight's story takes place in the modern age, focusing on Maya, a Seattle teenager who decides to live stream the Bloody Mary challenge in her bathroom to attract viewers.
Maya wants to be as authentic as possible. She ensures the bathroom is completely dark, locks the door, and lights only a small candle. Her phone camera is set up to record both her face and the mirror. Hundreds of viewers are tuning in. Maya tries to maintain a calm expression, but her eyes betray her anxiety. She begins the ritual. Maya, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. As she says the name the second time, viewers in the live stream begin reporting something strange. The candlelight starts flickering wildly. Despite the lack of wind, Maya takes a deep breath and says the name a third time, Bloody Mary. Silence descends. Everything seems normal, until the viewers start reacting. Maya asks, "What's going on? I don't see anything." But the comments are flooding with panic. "Her face! Look in the mirror! Hurry!" Maya turns to look into the mirror. Initially, she only sees her own face, hazy in the candlelight. But then, she sees it. Her reflection in the mirror is not quite her. The face slowly breaks into a wide grin, but Maya's real face remains fearful and horrified. The eyes in the mirror are larger, darker, and the skin is corpse pale. And then, the face in the mirror begins to speak. It doesn't say, "I am Bloody Mary." It speaks in Maya's own voice, but cold and mocking. "What are you looking at? I've been here all along." At the same moment, all the live stream viewers hear a loud, terrifying cackle, which doesn't seem to come from Maya's phone, but appears to emanate from inside their own headphones or speakers. Maya screams, trying to run. She stumbles, dropping the phone, and the candle is snuffed out. The live stream screen goes pitch black. The live stream ends abruptly. The police find Maya in the bathroom, curled up in a corner, completely speechless. She cannot recall anything that happened, but the viewers of the live stream saw the very last thing. When the phone dropped to the floor, the microphone remained active. In the absolute darkness, a final whisper was recorded. The voice was not Maya's. It was the voice of the entity in the mirror, but this time, it was not speaking to Maya. It spoke directly into the camera. The voice chuckled, then whispered one final line, not for the girl, but for the listener tuning into this very series. "You thought you were just listening to a ghost story, didn't you?" And with that breaking question, the entire series concludes. Bloody Mary is not a ghost trapped in a mirror. It is an entity that knows our curiosity is our weakness. It knows that even as we try to rationalize these legends, a deep part of our soul still wants to believe. The series American Shadows, 10 Most Terrifying Legends, has come to an end. Thank you for joining this terrifying journey. Remember, the dark is waiting, and you never know who is looking back at you from the glass.